And we are back.
You can't stop us. You can't stop us.
I'm telling you.
So we got
one more time. Let's go.
I love this scripture.
Let's go.
Acts 17:16-31. While Paul waited for them in Athens, he was deeply distressed to find the city flooded with idols. He began to interact with Gentile God worshippers and Jewish people in the synagogue. He also addressed whoever happened to be in the marketplace each day. Certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers engaged him in discussion too. Some said, "What an amateur. What's he trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seemed to be a proclaimer of foreign gods." They said this because he was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They took him into custody and brought him to the council on Mars Hill. "What is this new teaching? Can we learn what you are talking about? You've told us some strange things, and we want to know what you mean." They said this because all Athenians, as well as foreigners who live in Athens, used to spend their time doing nothing but talking about or listening to the newest thing. Paul stood up in the middle of the council on Mars Hill and said, "People of Athens, I see that you are very religious in every way. As I was walking through the town and carefully observing your objects of worship, I even found an altar with an inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What you worship as unknown, I now proclaim to you. God, who has made the world and in it, is Lord of earth. God doesn't live in temples made with human hands, nor does God served by human hands, as though God needed something, since God is the one who gives the life, breath, and everything else. From one person, God created every human nation to live on the whole earth, having determined their appointed time and the boundaries of their lands. God made the nations so that they would seek God, perhaps even reach out to God and find God. In fact, God isn't far away from any of us. We live in God, move and exist in God. Some of your own poets said we are God's offspring. Therefore, as God's offspring, we have no need to imagine that the divine being is like a gold or silver or stone image made by human hands and thought. God overlooks the ignorance of all things in times past, but now directs everyone everywhere to change their hearts and lives. This is because God has set what God intends to judge the world justly by a man God has appointed. God has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. All right. Let me plug this in. And they could hear me with this plugged in. No, we'll just go without it.
Close. You got it.
Yeah, we'll go without it.
I'll step back.
We'll go without it. So thank you once again. We are having all kinds of issues this morning. If it's not Zoom, it's Facebook Live. But as I say, we're going to keep going and keep going. We'll get this to you regardless if this cuts out in the middle of it or not. We'll get it to you, and then we can post it online, and you can take a look at it later on. But there is a word to be given. If you're just joining us, we're coming from Acts 17. We're talking about Paul this morning. And if you're with a neighbor or a friend, a spouse, whomever you're with this morning, with your children, turn to them, and I always like titles. I'm a title person. So turn to them and say, what will we say? What must we do?
What will we say? What must we do?
What will we say? What must we do? In August of 1963, our very own Atlanta native, Martin Luther King Jr., gave in response to the bigotry and the racism that plagued America a 17-minute message about a dream that he had. And at this March on Washington, over 250,000 people waited to hear something that would force America to look in the mirror, to finally admit its faults, and start bending that arrow back towards justice and human equality. Now, we all know the words of Martin having a dream of a new normal. And even though it's been over 60 years, we can still say that this dream of equality is still not the normacy in which we see today. The normacy of economic equality, human equality, justice in an unjust legal system. The normacy of politics over people is still alive and well. Martin dreamed of a new normal where character outweighed the stigma of color and racism. On that day, his words had substance. It had an impact. It was bold in nature. The fact of the matter is that after any tragedy, after any event, as we say today, goes viral, if something happens that affects a number of people, whether it's a tragedy like 9/11, a mass shooting, a unjustified death like Ahmaud, whether it's a death of someone deemed important like Kobe Bryant, or something happens to change the way society interacts with one another, or changes how we live, aka COVID-19. After any of these events, in the midst of these tragedies and happenings, most often we look for our leaders to make a statement of support, a statement to calm the masses, to ensure us that everything is going to be all right. In many of the cases, if it's on television, they call it breaking news. In this age, most statements, most speeches are made by way of IG and Twitter and Facebook. Whatever the source is, we expect something to be said by these designated people, by our leaders. And depending on the person and the magnitude of the moment, we sometimes even expect a speech. Most times it's the president, which I would personally say I don't like hearing the president right now, but that's another topic. Or it's some other leader whose voice can reach the masses. Maybe it's a celebrity, maybe it's a pastor, the mayor, or the governor, or a public figure like our former president. But no matter the title, we look for an orator whose importance, whose style, whose substance will have an impact. It has been like this ever since leaders were born. People who were not afraid to respond. People who the masses expected to respond. And I'm reminded of a few this morning throughout history where there was a required speech where the people needed to hear something that had substance, that would make an impact, that was bold. One of the first speeches I've ever read was one by Frederick Douglass. And most of you should know him. He's one of the more common Black folks that we learn about in elementary school, this Black icon, Frederick Douglass, along with the other icons that we learn about. But he gave a speech in which he was invited to give on July 5th, 1852. It was in New York and it was titled, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." What to the slave is the 4th of July. See, Frederick Douglass was a former slave himself, and he had become popular speaking in the anti-slavery movement. He traveled thousands of miles every year giving speeches, and New York expected to be electrified and entertained by Douglass when they asked him to speak. They thought he was going to talk about the importance of Independence Day. But soon they were disavowed of that idea. Douglass took the opportunity to boldly point out the hypocrisy of a nation celebrating the ideas of freedom and equality, while at the same time being bathed in the evil of slavery. As we would say today, he read them for filth, called them out on their bigotry. And in the midst of the crowd on the 4th of July, Independence Day, he said these words: "I am not included within the pale of your glorious anniversary. Your high independence only revels the immeasurable distance between us. The blessing in which you this day rejoice is not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice and liberty and prosperity and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me." Simply put, in front of all of these people on the 4th of July, he said that this Independence Day that you're celebrating is not mine to celebrate, but is yours. His words had substance. They made an impact. They were bold in nature. Another moment in history, and we'll get to Paul, was when Abraham Lincoln gave a statement after the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. Now, if any of you all know me, if you know me, you know I'm sort of a nerd when it comes to the Civil War. As a young man, I read all the books I could get my hand on. And this Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 was one of the major battles at that time. It was basically right dab in the middle of the Civil War. And the whole country was waiting for a response because so many people had lost their lives. He said these words, that the living can honor the wartime dead, not with speech, but perhaps by continuing to fight for the ideas of which they had given their lives for. See, people need to hear something after that battle. Thousands had lost their lives. They needed a word of encouragement, of support, words that could move them forward in a new era of human equality. To remind them that this is what it's all for. No longer can America be divided when it comes to human equality. His words had substance. They had impact. They were bold in nature. So that is the reason for our question this morning. With all that is happening around us and in our personal lives, the question is, what will we as Christians, as offsprings of God Almighty, what will we say to those in these changing times? What will we say to ourselves on days when we feel like giving up? What will we say to others? What must we do in this time? Will our words have substance? Will it make an impact? Will it be bold? So let's look at Paul this morning. What is it about Paul that we should admire in Acts chapter 17? What about the journey should we adapt into our own? Let's dive in and see. If you have your Bibles at home, go to Acts 17. We're going to go through this morning. For me, Paul in Acts is what I call, he's on a Lord of the Rings journey. He's the hobbit with the ring.
Speak it.
Because he is determined within his mission. He feels he's called to this work. He is focused on telling all who knows, friend, stranger, or foe, about a man named Jesus, the man that he encountered on the road. And he is willing to give it up at all costs, even at the cost of his health. He is welcome in the towns, and in other towns he is chased out as if he is a card-playing swindler who has just taken all of the saloon patrons' money. I love Westerns, so I had to put that in there. He is talked about, he is threatened, and even at times he is thrown in jail. But even with all of this, his journey continues. A special kind of hobbit was Paul. And along the way, he meets people and he sparks a fire in them. With this message of Christ's resurrection, and Silas and Timothy, they find that spark. And they too commit to the same calling as he, and they too start telling everybody about Christ. So in Acts 17, the journey continues. Let's connect the dots with Paul this morning. Paul, in this morning in Acts 17, where we find ourselves, is fleeing Berean and Thessalonica to the city of Athens. He has departed because his life is in danger. But this danger does not make him change his approach. I'm going to say that one more time. This danger did not make him change his approach. When he arrived in Athens, he was just been ran out of one town because those in high places didn't agree with his message. It gave the people too much freedom, too much ownership to go against the powers that be, the status quo, the empire. And now he is in Athens. He finds himself amongst a city covered with idols. The Bible tells us. Covered with idols. One ancient writer stated that it was easier to find a god in Athens than it was to find a man. It was full of idols. It was the Las Vegas of ancient times. And this was the city that he was attempting to preach the good news to. So for some, and maybe even for myself, this would have gave me some level of fear. Pause. Made me do an about face. But for Paul and friends, this stirred their spirits. They realized that the idols, that the false gods, that these statues with all of their beauty and glamour had placed a wall between the people of Athens and the one true God. Paul just ran out of town. Paul goes into the lion's den again. In the face of danger, he goes to the synagogue. Then he goes to the marketplace. He goes to the place of public concourse. And the word tells us that daily he met with them. Day after day, he met with the Epicureans. These were the Asiatic materialistic sectors of society. He went to the Stoics. These were the ones that believed and taught virtue, that the highest good is based on knowledge and wisdom and what you can learn through a book. He went to them who wouldn't listen. He went to those who were hostile to the word. And he went to those who did not believe as he did. And what is this telling us in this day? What is it telling us now? What will we say? What must we do? And he talked so much that the word tells us they asked the question, what is it that this babbler is trying to say? It's like he wore them out to where they had to listen to him. Maybe we should take that on ourselves. Maybe there's telling us this morning, one, first point, don't stop talking, right? And then two, it tells us this morning that in spite of the times where fear lives, in spite of the hostile pushback that we may feel and receive, we who are the offspring of God must continue to preach the good news, to approach that doesn't change in times. We should lead with love, and we should end our conversations with love. That is our approach. Nothing should stop us from living like God's love, because in God's love, there is the pursuit and the way to bring about justice and human equality, peace, community, and love. In love, we should protest. In love, we should voice our dismay for our justice system. It's in love that we fight for our rights. We should call anyone out, whether it be friend, family, or foe, pastor, a politician, government official, state or federal level. Let them know that if your laws and your policies don't reflect God's love, then there's something wrong with it. It needs to be changed. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, but today it needs to be changed. What will we say? What must we do? We can't be quiet, that's for sure. That's why Paul went to the streets, and not just to the temple, but he went to the streets to all who would listen. His words had substance. They had an impact. They were bold in nature. And because of his words, because of his bold action, the words tells us, if you're following me, that they took him to the high courts. There was a hill where the judge of judges passed sentence on the greatest criminals, and at the same time, they attempted to answer the gravest questions surrounding religion. No place in Athens was more suitable for the conversation they were about to have. This was like a modern day Capitol Hill. They were ready to listen, though, to examine the words of what he had to say. And this is a side sermon, but isn't it just amazing how when you're in your purpose, when God has a calling on your life, and you're consistent in your walk with Christ, and what your calling is, it is amazing how God can put you in spaces amongst people that you never thought you would be amongst. Put you in positions that allow you to use your voice in places where you know those around you will have imagined you to ever be.
You preaching to you.
That's a sermon. I'm not going to preach all of that one this morning. Places where you can really make change happen. That's where Paul found himself this morning. God placed him in front of the right folks to where change could happen. Yeah. So they were kicking their heels. They were waiting for Paul to speak. And the Bible tells us this morning, this is what they spent their time doing all day. Nothing but listening to new ideas, trying to find out the next hot topic. And Paul did come with the next hot topic. So Paul starts his speech. And first he gives an overview of his stroll throughout town. Can't you see Paul talking? And I imagine him in the middle of the crowd, and there's a balcony, and it's these old men with white robes on. They're eating fruits and grapes. You know how they do in the movies. I imagine Paul standing in the middle of them and just looking around, and all these important people are listening, waiting to hear what he had to say. And then Paul sits there and say, hey, I walked through your town and I observed all of the sights. I've looked around and I see the glamour and the beautiful artwork of these so-called unknown gods. And it is quite impressive. I mean, the glamour of it all, it looks amazing. I must say, I've never seen anything like this before. Stunning, to say the least. Can't you hear Paul talking? But I have come with good news for every and every one of you about this unknown God. The God who made the world and everything in it, who is the Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in your shrines made by human hands. Nor is God served by your artwork as if God needed it. God gave us life and breath and all the things. And these statues, yeah, they look good, but they have no substance, no value. One ancestor, Paul goes on to speak and says, from one ancestor God made all of the nations to inhabit all the earth. And God allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of their place. And on top of all of that, God, the one true God, is not far from any one of us. Not even you.
With the ancestors.
Not even you. For we too, as your poets say, we too are the offspring of God. Paul's words here had substance. It made an impact. It was bold for him to say these things. It informed the uninformed of a new way forward. Introduced them to Christ and the sacrifice made, told them about the reason for the season. And in his speech, if you notice, Paul used their own words to connect with them. Let's go back. It says that even some of your own poets have said, for we too are his offspring. So the question is, again, what will we say? What must we do? Well, one, I told you we must be consistent about our message. We must not stop talking about the message of love. But even in the midst of this change, we are still needing to invoke change. So what Paul is telling us to do this morning is, let's try to make a connection with our words and with our language. We have to use the language so that people can understand. When speaking to people and when you're trying to get to know them and reach them, I learned a long time ago that you have to be able to switch. Make it plain. You have to be able to speak with people on their level. And sometimes you have to change how you talk in order for them to hear you. Paul used their own words against them. Even Paul said it in Romans, said, I become whatever I need to become so that I may reach someone. And on a larger scale, if you're going to make change happen in your own government, then let's use their words that they prescribe about their justice system. If America says that all are created equal and that all are protected under the law, then why does the flower not bloom through the dirt and mud of racism and classism for all to experience?
Say that.
If this is the land of the brave and the free, a land built by immigrants, then why do our country not allow them in? Depending on where you're from, though, right? If we are to believe that we, the people of the United States of America, in order to become a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and prosperity, then why is there such a gap between the words of human and equality? Why is there such a gap between the words black and lives matter? What will we say? What must we do? Well, keep talking until someone hears us. Vote as if your life depends on it. Pray as if your soul depends on it. Love like our hearts need blood to pump for it. Give as if in every part of your life you are abundant.
Yes.
Don't just preach the good news, but live the good news. It's nothing else matters. In the midst of all of what's going on, we should at least act justly. Love mercy and walk humbly with God. This has substance. This will have an impact. This is bold in nature.
Bold.
And in your personal life, what will we say? What will we do when we feel like giving up? When we feel like we had enough? Simply, Pastor asked the question, what will we say? What will we do? We will speak life over ourselves.
Speak life.
In the midst of change, we'll speak life over ourselves. Yes, I've lost my job, but I'm going to speak life. Yes, that relationship didn't work out, but in the midst of all of that, I'm still going to speak life.
Life.
Yeah, I put all my eggs in that basket and it didn't work right. So what? Speak life.
Speak life.
Over yourself. Yeah, I heard the doctor say it looked bad, but no matter what, speak life.
You're speaking life, Pastor.
What will we say? What will we do? We will speak life. Because when you speak life in the face of the unknown, that's faith. Your faith will have substance. It will have an impact on your life. And it will be bold in nature. May you be blessed.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
I think we are blessed by that message.
Amen. Amen.
I believe it. I believe it. You were speaking life, Pastor. Thank
Amen.
you.
Amen.
Thank you.
So
Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord for this message that has come to us this morning through barriers, online barriers, physical barriers, barriers that separate us, racial barriers. Henra said it, when we are in our call, we find ourselves where we might not think we would have been. And people watching, those in Facebook land who are watching this later, maybe on YouTube, if you find yourself in a place that you never thought you would be, speak life.
And regardless of what's going on, speak life.
Life, Henra. That was a message for all of us. And we just want to say at Park Avenue, we're trying to speak life in this time. We're trying to create things together across boundaries, physical, distance, barriers created culturally. And if this speaks to you, if this speaks life to you, join us. Join us. Come join us. So this is a response time. We've seen things in the chat. We've seen things, people talking back. I'm talking back in the chat. Use the chat now to talk to each other, to tell Pastor Henra, to give us a response, to say, I'm going to use my voice beyond the barriers. I'm going to use my voice to speak life. Amen. So this is your time to respond. We are so grateful to be here like this. We're just grateful that we get to use our voices, I think, this morning. Amen. And that life is still coming through us and through God. So maybe we can say a prayer.
Let's say a prayer. Definitely, like I said, we'll give a benediction. We thank all of you all who joined us this morning with all that's going on, Zoom and Facebook issues. God still made a way for us to have a word this morning. If you remember nothing that I've said, speak life over yourself. No matter what's going on in your life, God will place you in places that you never thought you could be. Just be consistent in your message, pursue your calling, and speak life over yourself, no matter how things are looking. If we could, let's pray this morning. You want to pray?
Yeah, let me pray, and then Pastor Henra can do our benediction. God, who we don't claim to know fully, unknown God as Jesus, thank you. Thank you for this time and this morning. Thank you for the words from who I consider my family. Thank you. Thank you for the waking me up this morning. Thank you for waking us up this morning. Thank you for a community that is bold in our message. And we say, all are welcome. We mean it. Thank you, God. Thank you for this vocation. And I pray and ask that everyone who hears this message be filled up by this message, be filled with life, and at minimum, just be filled with the will to do today. That's all we have. God, you are with us in the present, and we thank you. Amen.
Amen. This is our benediction this morning. Go into a world where it is we are the people, where we are the people can do anything that God places on our heart if we're walking in a consistent calling of God's direction. Go into a world where you need to be bold, where you need to have substance, and where we need to make an impact as people of God. Go into a world and speak life, not just over yourself, but over others. Sometimes people don't have that capacity, so go and speak life. Be bold, be creative, be consistent. Go.
Amen.
Amen.
Whew. Pastor, thank you.
All kinds of issues, didn't we?
Woo.